Alright, so to get started, the first thing you're going to want to do is to copy or to clone the GitHub repo that contains the boilerplate that you're going to use for this specific project. Also, you'll need fairly good understanding of Python programming, and with that you'll be able to follow along comfortably. Now, I've opened the development folder that contains all the files that you're going to need for this specific project. So let me explain exactly what we have. So we have the requirements.txt. These are all the libraries that you are going to need for this specific project. This is our virtual environment, and as you can see on the terminal, it's activated, and then the app folder is where we have all the files and folders that we're going to need for this project. The link to this specific repo is in the description below, so all you have to do is clone it into your development repo, and that's it. So let me explain the contents of the app directory. So we have the main.py. This is the entry point of our application, and as you can see, we have integrated hot reload into our development. I'll be using Kaki, a Python library. So if you don't know what hot reload is or how to integrate it into your development process, I've made a video on the same. The link is in the description below, so be sure to check it out before you come back to this video. Apart from the main.py file, we have another app directory inside the main app directory. So this app directory contains two files, a .py file and a .kivy file. In the .py file, I have defined a root widget. I'm calling it entry point, and it is inheriting from the MD screen. Also, there's an icon dictionary. Basically, this contains all the icons that we are going to use for the calculator mapped to their individual values. With this dictionary, it will make it easy for us to automatically generate all the buttons that you're going to need for the calculator. In the .kivy file, I've also defined the entry point. This is our root widget, and the same root widget defined in the .py file. I hope that is clear. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to start up our application. So debug 1, I'll set debug to 1. That means we are setting debug to true, and then python 3 main.py. Okay, just to be clear, I'm in the app folder, and with that we are greeted with an application. So let me just size it like that, and we're good to go. So in this first section, we're going to focus on building the UI, the main components of the UI that you're going to need, because the remaining UI components that you're going to need, we're going to implement them in the .py file. Okay, in this main_UI.py, because I want elements stacked on top of each other, I'm going to nest widgets inside the MD box layout, and I'm going to set the orientation to vertical. And then inside this box layout, I'm going to create another box layout. Why am I creating another box layout? Because if I pull up the calculator, the application, you'll realize that we have an MD text field stacked on top of, let me just pass in a few values, right? I don't know if that will work. Yeah, okay, whatever. We have a text field stacked on top of our MD label, and that's why I'm nesting an MD box layout inside the main MD box layout, because it's only going to contain the MD text field and the MD label. I'm going to set its size into 4. That is space enough to be able to nest a text field and a label. I'm going to set the padding to 5 for the X, and for the Y, I'm going to set the padding to 2. Also, I'll be setting its orientation to vertical so that child widgets are stacked on top of each other. I'll give it a color of black for now, okay? But because there is no other widget nested inside this main MD box layout, what will happen is this MD box layout is going to occupy the entire space. And then the first widget inside this MD box layout is going to be an MD anchor layout. This MD anchor layout is what is going to nest the MD switch that you're going to use to toggle between light and dark themes. I'll set the size hint X to none so that I can manually set the width. I'll set the anchor X to right because I want it to move to the right, and I'll also set the anchor Y to top so that it is positioned at the top right corner of our application. I'll set the position hint of the MD anchor layout to right. I'll push it to the right because it only occupies a small space. I'll push the whole anchor layout to the right. I'll set it to 0.97 so that it doesn't go all the way to the edge of the application. Apart from that, I'll set its width to 50 because I've set the size hint X to none. And then finally, I'll add the MD switch. And with that, you'll see that the MD switch has been included to application. Apart from the MD anchor layouts, I will include an MD text field. This is what is going to receive input from the user. I'll give it an ID of text field. So the reason why I'm giving the MD text field an ID is because we will want to be able to access the content of the MD text field from the .py file. And then I'm setting the line animation to false, the active line also to false, and then the base direction, I'm setting it to right to left. By default, the base direction of an MD text field is set to left to right, but for most calculators you'll realize that the input starts from the right. That's why I'm setting the base direction to RTL, or right to left. And then I'm also setting the keyboard property to managed. Why? Because we don't want that when the on focus event is fired on the MD text field, the keyboard is brought up. We want whatever input the user is going to pass into the MD text field is going to solely come from the buttons that we're going to include. So that's why I'm setting the keyboard property to manage. I'll set the font size of the text field to 40 dp, and then after that I'm going to add an MD relative layout. So inside this MD relative layout is where we're going to nest the MD label, and I'll explain why I'm not just nesting the MD label inside this MD box layout, but I'm going further to nest it inside another layout. I'm setting the size hint wide to none so that I can be able to set the height property manually, and I'm setting the height of the MD relative layout to 40 dp. And then after that, I'm now nesting the MD label and I'm giving it an ID text label. Why am I giving it an ID text label? Is because we will want to update the content or the text property of the MD label from the main.py file. And then apart from that, I'm setting its adaptive height to true. By setting its adaptive height to true, I'm telling the MD label to adapt its size to the size of the text that it's going to hold. And then I'm setting H align to right so that the MD label is pushed to the right, just like in the calculator. As you can see, we have the MD label pushed to the right. So that's why I'm setting the H align property to right. That's it for the first layout. So the real reason why I'm nesting the MD label inside the MD relative layout is because by default, when you start the application, the text property of the MD label is going to be empty. And when it's empty, the MD label tends to occupy more space, even though the adaptive height is set to true, because the MD label cannot adapt to text or to empty text. So it ends up occupying more space than it should. By nesting it inside an MD relative layout, I'm restricting its size irrespective of whether the text property has value or not to 40 dp. Now moving on to the next layout, the MD grid layout nested inside the box layout. That means it's going to be stacked on top of this MD box layout. So this is where most of the functionality is going to reside. I'm going to set its size hint to 0.6 because I've set the size hint of MD box layout to 0.4 plus 0.6 is going to be 1, and then I'll give it an ID also because we will want to be able to access this grid layout from the .py file. And then I'll set the columns to 4 because let me just bring up the calculator. You'll see we have exactly 4 columns. That's why I'm setting calls property to 4. And then I'm setting the call force default to true and row force default to true. When you set the call force default to true, what happens is the MD grid layout does not respect the size hint X or the width of the child elements, and that is exactly what we want. And the row force default set to true, it means that the MD grid layout will not respect the size hint Y and the height of the child properties. And then after that, I'll also set the call default width to self.width divided by 4. The call default width, okay, is going to be the width of each individual column in the MD grid layout. I'm setting it to self.width divided by 4. So let me explain what that means. So this is the width of the entire application. And as you can see, we have 4 columns. So I'm dividing the entire width by 4, and then I'm taking the result of dividing the application's width by 4 and assigning it to each column. I hope that is clear. I will also set row default height to self.height divided by 5. What that means is it will take the entire height of the MD grid layout. It's going to divide it by 5 because we have 5 rows, and the answer that you get is going to be assigned to each row. All this is to ensure that the application scales correctly irrespective of screen size. So we need to be able to access the grid layout, the MD text field widget, and the MD relative layout from the main.py file. So to do that, I'm going to define new properties, and these properties are going to hold the name of the ID property. That is by convention. If you want to be able to access IDs from the .py file, you define new properties, you set the values to be the values of the ID properties. I hope that is clear. And by convention, what you do, you define properties with the same name as the ID value. So for MD grid layout, I'm defining a new property MD underscore LT, holding the same value as the ID, and I will do the same for the text field, and I'll do the same for the MD label. That concludes the code that we require to build the main components for application. And as you can see, we have a text field, we have a label, it's invincible because it contains no value. We have a grid layout with all the properties set as expected, and we have an MD switch. So the next thing we're going to do is switch to the .py file and start adding functionality to application.